Hey guys, welcome to the Babbling Pastor Podcast. I am Michael, and this is
Rob.
okay. I was wondering how you were going to spin that. I didn't know if you were going to go Roberto or you're going to go some Italian. I don't know, but Rob's good. I like that.
No, yeah,
Keep
I just made that up, actually.
you just made your whole name up. Okay, so this sort of series episodes that we're doing are just one big one. If you're watching this at the very end where this just premieres, but if you're watching little clips here, what we're going to be talking about this time around is passing. I think the wording you used was passing the baton on to the next generation as far as faith and whatnot. It's very Mike Todd of you, by the way, to use that terminology. Passing the baton on. How do you feel about that connection between you and Mike?
Oh, I feel like now that you've said that, I'm gonna be a success.
Yes, with crazy
because
faith.
I was getting ready to say because of my crazy faith.
Okay.
In myself, you know.
Yeah.
Let's not pretend like that was crazy faith in God. But
Now, hey, before we get any further into it, I am doing my next one is on Stephen Furtick, and he had a book called Sun Stand Still, and it's also very similar to Crazy Faith in regards to that. Like, so it's interesting that like sort of the parallels between the two of them. But anyway, between Crazy Faith and Sun Stand Still faith, I think you're going to be able to pass that baton on, right? So to the next generation. So as we get into it, we're not just talking about like specifically passing the baton on in regards to pastoral leadership, though we will get to that. I like what you were talking about before we pushed record, which is this is just in general. This is passing faith on to your kids or passing faith on through the church or, and then obviously pastoral ministry as well. So where do you want to start on that? Because I think obviously this is a huge topic and we're going to have to break it down into little chunks. And each of these chunks is going to be a little bit different in application. I mean, obviously the way you pass down, pastoral leadership it's not the same way you would, pass down faith in your children and whatnot. So.
yeah, well, I mean, I think the principle begins because God has His own children, and um, He has given us His word as just a brief example, right? This is a way that He is passing Himself to us, revealing who He is to us in the first place. So I mean, you could go there. You could also begin to point to what you were alluding to, which is that Deuteronomy 6 is kind of the classic text for that, right? Where God is calling the basically parents to train up their children in the way that they should go according to the scriptures, right? Raising them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and passing the baton of Him, passing Him essentially along to the next generation, and all throughout you see Israel. I was just reading. I forget where I was reading. I'm reading in so many places at once. It's a problem, but but I was reading just the other day, and they it was in Joshua. And they were crossing over the Jordan on dry land, right? And as they crossed over the Jordan on dry land, he has them, God has them put the 12 stones, right? The 12 big stones up as a remembrance. And specifically, it says that the purpose of this is so that when your children ask in ages to come, pretty much, right? Hey, what are these stones all about? It's a reminder of me. And so it really begins there. I think we begin this kind of subject or journey by just acknowledging that this is simply how God has created things. Um, uh, because there are new humans arriving, um, they have to learn how to do everything, right? We're potty training. We're
That's a
teaching
fun
them.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's been a while, so I mean, I don't remember much about all of those things,
You
except it's over and
You
I'm glad
don't
it's over.
remember the times where there's a small child yelling from the bathroom, "Somebody wipe my butt." You don't remember that conversation, those moments of
Well,
trauma for you.
um, no, maybe
Okay,
maybe I just blocked it out.
it's
Maybe that's what
possible.
happened. That yeah,
Okay,
could be.
so
Uh,
so let's.
every every I actually my lack of memory of that is giving lots of young people hope right now. So
Yeah, they're like,
um
"Oh, I don't have to
yeah.
remember this."
So someday it will be so far away that I won't even remember it. Praise God. Um
Reminds me of that country song. You're gonna miss this. You're gonna want this. Let's start there. I like starting there. So let's start with the passing on thing. So I think that's important. That passage that you're talking about in regards to laying up the stones, like obviously not in the same way, much more in a figurative sense, but this idea of having moments where your kids having something that will have it to where your kids will ask, "Hey, what does this mean?" or "What is this thing that happened?" And you're able to look back and pass it on. And I think that goes back to a number of different things. I know we've talked about it on the podcast before, where we've talked about making sure your kids know your testimony, or they know that dad or mom wasn't always like this, and there was a moment in your life where it changed, and those are those sort of figurative things. And if you don't have those, right, so there's a reason that God said, "Hey, put these stones up," so when they do ask, you'll be able to tell them, because history is typically lost to younger generations unless it's purposefully passed on. I mean, there's a lot of cultures that are very purposeful in reminding the younger generation of things that they weren't there for the purpose of preserving that culture and sort of the ongoing, just the richness and understanding of what's come before them and the treasuring of that. And if you don't have that, you don't really have roots, and then you just do whatever you want to do and you don't learn from the past. And so let's talk about that. Like, what are, I guess, some things. I'm going to pick your brain as a pastor for a second. So, as a pastor, what are some of those things you would encourage your congregation typically to do? Maybe just through your preaching to have those moments, right? Because I mean, if we're saying, "Hey, you need to disciple up your kids, you need to teach your kids
mm,
well," what would be those moments where you'd be like, "All right, so maybe like in your life, build in sort of this repetition in order to facilitate that, perhaps."
hmm. That's actually really easy answer, and it's because we talk about it a lot around here, and that's family worship. um,
There you go.
the most regular, repetitious thing that any dad can do to lead his family spiritually, or single mom, or however life has worked that out at the moment, right, for you. The best thing that you can do is family worship. And I think that that's intimidating to a lot of people, which is a hindrance. Um, because honestly, we live in an
Well,
age where a lot of people don't even really understand how to do personal devotions
yeah.
very well. And so when you think about, oh my gosh, leading other people, even if it's just your family, that's really intimidating. But that's the first and form, like that's the number one
So
answer right
unpack
there.
that for a second, though, because there's some people that are probably from tradition. I mean, when we grew up, I don't know if we necessarily heard that terminology a lot. So unpack that for
hmm
somebody to real quick, real short sort of explanation. What even is that if they don't know what that is?
Yeah. So uh, family worship is it might seem more familiar if I use terms like family devotions
Okay, yeah.
or family Bible reading or something like that. But the reason that I use that terminology intentionally is because that's really what it is. Um, you you in the instance I'm talking about, you are leading your family in a a worship service, for lack of a, I mean, at the foundation of that, that's what's happening. Even if it's not, it doesn't have to be formal, right? It's not like you have to uh, dress up and like
You come in a
it's
clerical robe at like 7 o'clock at
right.
night.
Yeah, coming in a
Everyone, take
clerical
your
robe.
seats.
Yeah, and recite the sparkle, whatever it is. Um, the
Sparkle
I
Creed.
can't.
He's talking about the Sparkle
Yeah,
Creed. Everyone, it's a
yeah, the satanic sparkle creed. Um, and So it's not like it has to be that formal. It can be whatever fits your family the best, right? And I think a couple of things that really work against modern families today is first of all, what we just mentioned, and that's that a lot of people don't really even know how to do their own devotions, and that includes the men of the home who have this responsibility, which is really not a good thing. Right? Like you do have to understand what it means to have your own time with God and how important that is. And if you're not doing that, then you're not going to have your children could maybe lead you at some point in family worship. I mean, it's really not, you're not in a place that, that doesn't abdicate the responsibility though. And that's the problem, right? The scriptures clearly put the responsibility of leading your family spiritually on you men. And so that means that if you're clueless today about all of this, it means that just Google it today, and then tomorrow morning or tonight or at lunch today or whatever, um, get your Bible on your phone and spend some time in the Word and pray. And it really isn't rocket science.
No,
It's
yeah,
really not as intimidating as it is so often to us.
yeah.
And then family worship really isn't any different. We actually had we talked about worship in general in Sunday school here a while for like 12 weeks or something, um, uh, not too long ago, and one of those weeks was family worship. It was all about that, and um, the I brought in several different little books and stuff that to use as examples for that. And I know we have one of our elders does he just reads a chapter out of the Bible and then prays. Like it's not like he comes up with a sermon or um or gets a guitar and um sings
Leads it out.
songs,
Yeah. Starts playing
um
Hillsong. Yeah.
um yeah, so we would have just maybe this should be a course. Maybe there should be a course.
there you go. See, you're like,
Or
I don't
maybe
know.
a short bulleted list of what not to do.
See,
But
it sounds simple until I start throwing some wrenches into your situation, and you're like, no, that's not what I meant. Yeah.
but if I think we get intimidated because we think that uh that by leading family worship we have to have all the answers just in case. Like we should be some sort of authoritative something or other on the Bible, like a Bible scholar of some sort. Like I should probably know what the Greek word behind this is before but that's not the case. I mean, at the end of the day, all you're doing the exact same thing as when you say, "Hey, son, don't do that."
Yeah.
That's all you're doing.
Hmm.
It really is all that you're doing. So,
Well, I think part of
um,
that is the good part of that is in not knowing it all is that you learn. Not only do you learn together, but they can watch you learn it too. Like so, as you're doing it, and be like, "Hey, I don't know. I got to look that up," and then even maybe walking them through the process of that.
yeah, yeah, and so I there's a if this is something that like you're listening to this and you're going, you know what? Yeah, I know you're right, but there's actually a book that is that I would suggest right now, that I think is one of the best things that I've found. Period. When it comes to family worship stuff, especially when it comes to getting your feet wet with it, um, and it's called Family Worship Bible Guide. That's the name of the book. It
Pretty self-explanatory
comes
title.
Yeah, Joel Beakey, I think, is the actual author. Um, all it is, I don't have a copy right here. I would show you because I gave it away this past week actually to somebody who used it. And so all it is every single chapter in the Bible, of every book of the Bible, there's like a short paragraph or two that are kind of bullet pointed talking points from every single chapter in the Bible. Um, so there's a little short paragraph with like a question, a thought-provoking question or discussion question kind of a thing at the end of that. And there might be one of those, there might be up to like three of those for each chapter in all of the Bible. And so it can't get more basic and helpful than that. As far as it would be nothing for you as a the parent leading this to read a chapter in the Bible and then read that paragraph, and there's your discussion. You know,
Yeah.
you know what
Just
I
all
mean?
laid out for you. Yeah. Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
So it starts there, so that's good, right? So the idea is saying starting at home, what's that look like to pass it on, and then I think we move into and maybe tell me maybe if your mind goes in a different direction, but for me, I think it goes into a very much of like a Titus 2 sort of idea. This idea of all right, so we're obviously the family is doing this, then obviously if we move up to the next level of the church and church interaction and all of that, we have very much of a sort of a Titus 2 sort of structure set up. So now you have older women teaching younger women, older men being examples for younger men, and those relationships not necessarily being family relationships, but just
Mm,
church family relationships. So now you have maybe those that don't have that home structure, you now that are in church or have never seen that sort of structure before, that are in church, that are maybe new Christians, or just Christians in general that need discipled. You have that structure set up that Paul gives Titus rather, where he's like, all right, so this is what it looks like, this is why it's here, and the whole purpose. I mean, we won't get into Titus 2, but you can go read it, and the idea of them saying the reason that this is set up in such a way is so that the gospel isn't reviled, so that Christ is exalted, right? So you have older women teaching the younger women, hey, I've done this before, you don't want to do this, or the older men, telling the younger men about self-control and the importance of that and what that looks like and the implications of that. And then you have sort of the for lack of a better term, I'm going to laugh every time I say it, but the baton being passed on in regards to life experiences and living that out and what that looks like to
yeah.
be changed by the gospel. And I think that's just a really neglected. It's really short. It's a very short chapter amongst all of this. It's so short, but it's very much applicable to say like, hey, do you want, what does it look like for the church to come around one side of one another, to lead one another in very specific areas of their life? I mean, and I recently preached on Titus 2, and I really like how Paul tells Titus, he's like, hey, saying it without saying it, like, you don't know anything about young women and what they go through, so let the older women deal with that, basically, because his direct command is the older women are supposed to do this, not you. Like, this isn't your
Mm,
job. Your job is to make sure the older women are teaching the younger women the things of the gospel, and in a way that's like life experience, and they've been there, they know what's going on, and they know how you're processing, they're
hmm
processing it in their head, and I think
They
that's
know
so
how
valuable.
the younger women feel.
Exactly. Yes.
And since you're a guy, there's a decent chance you probably don't know how to feel. So,
You have no feelings at all, so you are not connected whatsoever. I mean, that's not entirely untrue. I'm just like, why are you crying? Yeah, I
mhm.
mean, because I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Please stop. Please stop.
think this out in a logical way. No. So anyway, so yeah, exactly. And the whole process is that is set up for the benefit of the body and those that are in the body. And it's very much a very similar model. But it is set instead of in the home, very much in the church, and that is I think there's things that I don't know, for example, how to do. So I can teach let's just use it, father and son. I can teach my son everything I know about what I know. But now that we're, when you're in the local body, in the local church, there's some things that other guys know or experiences they've had that they can teach him that I don't just have any clue about. And I think that's sort of that next sort of passing on the baton part where they're like, hey, there was this dumb thing one time that I did and you should not do it. And this is why. So just don't, it looks fun, it's not. And just sort of that passing that down in that way, I think is just invaluable when it's done right.
Yeah, I think one of the struggles that I have found in living that out and ensuring that that's lived out. Let me say it that way. um, is that there sometimes our retirement culture in America gets in the way of that. Um, and so there really can be two different extremes that are problematic. Um, one is that and we experience both of these things here, because it I mean, you're still dealing with humans and humans that have struggles, and it's a difficult thing. So on the one hand, you might have people um in the church. So specifically, this one is going to specifically be talking about actual ministries within the church. But you have people in the church who have been doing a ministry for a really, 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 really long time, and there's a lot of ownership there, and a lot of which is a good thing, right? Um, but to some, it can seem almost like abrasive or offensive, that to even suggest that, hey, you should probably be training someone to replace you. You know, I mean, um, and so there's almost like a, no, this is my, you know, and that can be really hard. At and the reasons behind that are several, really. I mean, there's a fear that, okay, well, then what? What am I going to do then? This is what I've been doing. Like there are a lot of legitimate things there that to talk about, but that's one thing that can kind of get in the way of in the church life, um of really living out Titus 2. And the other thing that I've found here that is a really a major thing, is we we have this. I was just asked about this retirement thing by a couple just a couple of weeks ago from our church. Like, does the Bible have anything to say about retiring? Um, and I mean, it's a good question, and so we talked about it for a little bit. But one of the things that I told them is that, like, the main thing to keep in mind here is that, like, retiring from your job or whatever, that's perfectly within the limits of Scripture. Of course, it's fine,
No, Jesus says to work
but
until you die. Yeah.
yes, but nowhere in the Scriptures are we allowed to retire from ministry. That's not a thing. And so that I think we have some folks who, um uh it's so tragic, but some folks who are older and they might retire from their job, but that also in their mind that means that they retire, period. And so they're no longer serving in ministries that they served in. They're no longer engaging in meaningful ways. Um, and they maybe are skipping church to go to be at the lake all the time or whatever it might be. And man, like what you end up, you don't think about it this way, but what you end up doing is completely robbing a generation of all of your wisdom. Like that's the main function for you in the church at that stage in life, is to pass on all of the riches of your wisdom that you've
Yeah.
learned throughout your years. And you shouldn't retire from that. It's such a tragedy.
Well, and I think part of that, to tap in before I totally lose this thought, I think a lot of that is because identity, just in general, this isn't just that generation, but in general, identity is tied to what you're doing. And so when you lose that thing, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, you feel
Yeah.
like you lose your identity as well. And then with that comes like, what am I supposed to do? Like there does seem to be, especially at that age, or I think some people go through it in a variety of different levels, especially if you have a major career shift as well. That is a similar sort of
Hmm.
thing. But this idea of, oh, well, there's like everything changes now. Like it's like a hinge. So if this major, enormous thing that I've put all of my identity into shifts, everything else has to too, because I don't know what to do now. So that's where I think that drops off. And there's this idea that like, well, I don't have this thing that gave me all my purpose anymore. And therefore, what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really reveals a problem there, that was never your identity in the first place. But if you put all of your identity in
Yeah.
that, then, and you feel like you lose all your identity in that, then you do make that shift. Whereas, rather, if you understand your identity is in Christ, and this is just an extension of that, whenever that shift changes, or that shift happens, rather, what you were talking about before, you have the proper lenses to say, like, all right, well, in this stage, or to go a little charismatic on you, season of my life, with this time in my life, all I'm doing isn't this major shift, but rather just sort of this natural progression of, okay, so all of my identity is in Christ, and it was focused toward this, or part of it was focused toward doing this job well for His glory. Now my identity still is in Christ, but my focus and intentionality is now toward those that are coming up after me. And so I think that's sort of depending on what lens you have when you enter into that, it's going to completely determine how you interact and engage with what's going on around you. Because if it does seem like this major shift and you don't know what to do, and you've not thought about it, and you were so busy doing your job that like you never process what comes
Mm-hmm.
after this, then you don't really think in those terms. And it like you said, the end of it is really robbing people of, because you're like, well, they don't want to hear from me, or I don't have anything to offer. And that's just not true. So
Yeah, and and I would even frame it a little bit more in depth, in that your identity is first and foremost in Christ, and so therefore the Great Commission is, that's your job, right? And that's a twofold thing. You're witnessing to unbelievers and you're training believers. That's the Great Commission. you're
I
you're
like that
and
phrasing. Yeah.
and so whether that is at work, whatever your career, whatever gifts God has given you, and those kind of things, and then that actually, if that's the framework, if that's who you are in your own mind, because it is in God's mind, right? Um, if that's who you are, then all that's shifting at that stage, and it's still a big shift, don't get me wrong, but all that's actually shifting is the mission field. Is your focus is going to be different, but the drive, the point of waking up every day, the reason you're doing the things that you're doing is exactly the same. It's not any different. It might just be looking like going over to a younger guy's house, helping him work on his car, if that's the thing you're good at,
That's a sermon right there.
and
Yeah.
just
I like this. What you just said,
right.
it's a whole sermon.
so so it's uh it it really does have to do with identity, and yet, this is one of the observations that I've just had over the course of this few years of pastoral ministry thus far, and before that, really, is that really is a struggle, that really is a problem in the world of the church. um we could say it this way: it's one of the ways that the identity problem that men have with identifying with their, like, I am my job, hey, what's your name, what do you do? Right? Because even in that little greeting that we always ask, we're asking, what's your name and who are you?
Hmm.
That's what we even mean by that, right?
Yeah.
um and and so that identity problem, that misstep in identity, uh really plays itself out badly at the end, with identity crisis. And in the identity crisis, a lot of young men end up not getting trained as robustly as they could be, for the gospel.
Yeah.
So
Well, the question always, like, and I've heard this said not in like I guess a degrading way, but sometimes I'll see people do something, they're like, "What? You didn't know to do that the right way?" And I'm like, "Well, you got to teach them to do it the right. Like, they don't know. You can't expect somebody to know how to do this unless they're
yeah.
taught through." And I think again, to sort of to end sort of this Titus 2 sort of talk, to move on to this next thing that I think is really sort of the natural flow here, but in that regard, teaching people how to sort of building that culture in, because that I think is the biggest sort of hurdle for people, is them, one, thinking they have anything of value to add, and two, teaching them sort of how to do that, because our culture doesn't have that. I mean, you don't, if you have a question about how to tie a tie, typically you don't go find a dude, you go to YouTube. So the whole idea is that like we've already got this sort of thing built in that if I want to know something, I can just go figure that out by myself. Like I can go, I don't need
Yeah.
you. I can just go to the online thing. And I think part of that, I mean, that's obviously a sort of a silly example, but that's the same sort of idea that is that if you don't naturally have people in your life that you feel like are you're not going to be an annoyance to when you go ask them things,
Mm.
and they feel like they can actually offer you something. Like if that's not built in a way that's just sort of natural, you're not going to have what we see in Titus 2. Again, we have to be fair, we have a completely different cultural system than Titus 2 that they're in. I mean, they obviously don't have the internet. There's obviously this passing down of sort of beliefs and how to do things and practices. I mean, we can go back to if your dad was a boat maker, you're probably a boat maker because that's just what you do. And that's just not at all how that's built anymore. So now, in order to get that flow of belief and thought and understanding into a place, you got to kind of work a little extra hard at that, because that's not naturally how the flow of things happen. And so there has to be this culture built into where they feel comfortable coming to somebody and that person feels comfortable giving that advice. And there's all sorts of cultural barriers and layers there that now you have to break down, because is somebody going to feel like I'm intervening because they didn't ask me a question to tell them how to do this? And then there's that whole, like, should I even ask them, or are they going to think I'm stupid sort of mentality? And sort of bringing that into the church and explaining to everybody, hey, like, it's fine. Like, it's okay to go to somebody wiser and older to ask a question. And if somebody comes to you
Yeah.
and ask a question, feel free to tell them that. Or if you see them struggling, gently come in and be like, hey, this is sort of, and it's going to be weird and it's going to be awkward and it's not going to be like super, easy at first. But the reality is it's going to be helpful. And I don't think I used this phrase when I preached that sermon on Titus 2, but the idea being, I mean, really at the base of it, the idea is be that person. If you're an older person, be that person you wish you had when you were going through that thing as a younger individual. Like, they need you to come in and be like, hey, it's fine. Just like turn the wrench that way, not the other way. Just those simple little things that help. I think are invaluable. And sometimes that does come across being a little pushy. And I'll say this example and then we'll kind of throw it over to you. But my father-in-law, I think, is a really good example of this, in the sense that I'm like, whenever I go to him and I'm like, hey, the brakes are going out. Can you teach me how to do this? And his version of teach me, which was really annoying at first, was to literally stand there and let me screw up while he was like, no, it's that thing right there. And then coming in when he had to, before I broke something entirely. And I think that example is, I found super valuable, because I can look that up on YouTube. I can look up how to change brakes on YouTube. But him being there and like intervening and giving tips and tricks was super helpful. And I think within the church, that's the same sort of situation, where it's kind of like, it's not that you're coming in and doing everything for somebody. It's that you're just saying, hey, no, that is a better way to do it. Or, hey, I learned how to do this and you should probably try it that way. And not being afraid to be a little pushy sometimes in order to kind of get that point across. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think we have a lot of problems in our culture, Michael. I know that's probably news to
No,
you,
we
because
don't. We don't.
you're not really involved in the culture much, and not really learned when it comes to cultural things. So I'll just tell you that there are lots of problems out there.
I don't believe you.
I think honestly, one of those being something that I thought of, it really is just comedically when you were talking just a few minutes ago, but it's not funny, is I can just imagine like some of the reaction that you would get, some of what might pop in somebody's head when we're talking about this is, but I don't think that they have Snapchat. How will I talk to them? It's like that honestly, communication in general is
Yeah.
just a barrier
Mm-hmm.
in our culture. because I mean we really do. I mean, it's a lot of. I mean, you're in the meme world. It's a meme for sure. It's probably been a million memes, but like we live in a culture that like you can't break up with a person that you're dating unless it's a text and a brief text, and then block them so you don't have to interact. You know, like
Wow, you are blocking?
like
Wow.
it's just like
It's very solid
um
and final.
like that nobody that there are lots of I think one of the things that's being uncovered here as we're talking about this honestly is that like there the amount of issues involved that are working against real genuine church discipleship, like it's a big hill. There's a
No, for
lot
sure,
of
yeah.
stuff in the way, and but I can imagine a situation in which, you know, like maybe the church culture is such, person grows up in that, and the church culture is such that before I think about going to YouTube, I'll ask Jerry, you know, like that can happen, and it should be the way that it happens. And I'll say that while confessing that I'm like a YouTube mechanic, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's just what I do, you know. um
Well, it's quicker. I
and
mean, let's be honest. It's quicker than calling somebody and seeing if they have time and and having again. That's that cultural breakdown. It's that
mhm,
we live so quickly that and that's just simply not the sort of way that obviously when Paul is writing to Titus. I mean, the letter itself took forever to get there. So
yeah,
it's just a matter of like there's just this speed and efficiency that we feel like we need, and it's not that that's bad. It's not bad. I mean, it's good that there's stuff like that available. But I think my point is just making sure that that doesn't get in the way of that communication, and I think there's a huge part of that on the side of the sort of the older those whoever is above the person asking the question, right? Of having patience and I mean, because there's some words that kids say that I don't even know what they mean anymore. Like, so whenever you're trying to like give advice, it's just you're gonna have to give me an entire dictionary on what you just said, so I know how to communicate this. But just
have side note about that kind of thing, that language thing, have you seen the Babylon Bee, the little video thing that they made for the Masters University?
no, I saw a link to it. I haven't even watched it. No.
Bro, they have and I know there are people in the audience that are gonna flip, and I'm gonna ruin your whole channel by saying this name, but they have
The
they
whole
have
channel. Wow.
MacArthur. They have MacArthur on there speaking this like Gen Z thing. He has like some line. Dude, it is the
Okay,
funniest
I
thing.
saw a clip of that and I legit thought it was
Woof.
I thought it was AI. I saw a clip of that and I thought somebody has had a computer make him say things. So that's real. That's a real wow. Okay. Okay.
But it is a real thing though, like the whole like language barrier, and it is for every generation, isn't
Yeah,
it?
that's
I
yeah.
mean, I
Yeah.
remember the same thing. Um, when like our own parents and or grandparents or whatever, you know, like there's always some sort of barrier like that for sure.
The other day I asked Haley, I said, "Do you if I say the phrase getting jiggy with it, do you understand what I mean?" And she goes, "You're an idiot. I have no idea what you're talking about." And I was, "That's fair. That's fair."
Yeah, well, you slap somebody publicly and your whole career is over and everyone
Yeah,
forgets you. You
and
know what I
nobody
mean?
nobody cares about getting jiggy. Yeah, so but
Yeah.
in that, like that whole
Even though
thing,
we're in the millennium.
we're in the millennium. What are you?
Yeah. You don't know what I'm referencing, do you?
I have no
Man.
idea. I have no
Well,
idea.
getting jiggy with it, it was Will Smith, right?
Was that the
Back in the
album?
day.
Was that
And
the?
Millennium is one of the songs that I think was on that album. I don't know. It's yeah, we definitely, if the MacArthur thing didn't do it, this did. So
Yeah,
sorry, man. Sorry, it's over. It's been a good run,
it's been a
Michael. It's been a
good
good
run on the
run.
podcast. Uh, I'm gonna have to look that up here in a minute. So, with that, with living in the millennium and having to have a whole dictionary of terminology, I think it is imperative to be patient with those you're talking to, because there's going to be questions well, again, there's people that probably come to you that ask a question, and you're like, you don't know that. And I think part of that is also understanding that people you go to and ask those questions have probably the same thought about you, but they're being super patient with you. I know there's 1,000 questions I've either asked my dad or my father-in-law that they've probably in their head thought, I thought you were an adult. And they just don't say it out loud. And are incredibly patient with asking
I
that
thought
question.
for sure you weren't an idiot. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Exactly. That's a guarantee that they've thought that. And so it's a matter of, having that and being patient. So with that being I think that sort of closes that chapter. So you have obviously a place where in the home, you're raising your family, your kids, you're training them up. There's this whole other aspect in the church that Paul lays out in Titus 2. Let's talk about that sort of another very more niche aspect of this, of raising up the next sort of leadership in the church. Now that doesn't necessarily mean just pastors, but I definitely want to talk about that. But just a whole leadership in general, what that looks like, the difficulty of that, and really honestly, when we're talking about this, my concern, I think, is in glaringly obvious examples that I'm not sure how are going to turn out, such as like MacArthur. When he dies, who in the world Grace Community Church is MacArthur. When Matt Chandler leaves the village, what is that? Matt Chandler is the village church, right? The whole ordeal when Mark Driscoll blew up Mars Hill, like all those churches just sort of spun off into this randomness because nobody had a backup plan. And so, or there's no backup plan that I'm aware of. And you have that on a much smaller scale in local churches as well. I mean, so when I did that video essay on Andy Stanley, part of that was looking at Charles Stanley. And there was a part where Charles Stanley gets a job at a church, and it's basically because there was just this pastor leaving, and they had no backup plan. They're like, hey, do you want to come? Do you want to do this? And there's that's just so typical of a church not to have a plan in place for somebody to come in after. It's just like, God will work it out. Well, yeah, I mean, he's in control, but you should probably try. So it's just a matter of let's talk about that next sort of leadership. And I think your example, just from sort of your transition, I think that's a pretty good example of that.
Yeah, I think so. First of all, the God will work it out mentality, I think, that just logically that doesn't play, right? Because you wouldn't say that if bills were on your table. You know what I mean? God will figure it out. I don't have to mail these in.
He'll pay him.
That's stupid. That's stupid. So that's not
I
gonna
sowed
fly.
my faith
God
seed.
will indeed
Somebody
work
will
it
mail
out,
me a
right?
check.
But
Yeah.
yeah, no big deal. I think so. Sometimes transitions in churches look a little bit more like David and Absalom and Solomon than they should. I like where if you're not familiar with that and you're listening, it was an obvious joke, but at the same time, Absalom attempts to take the kingdom away from David, and his son is David's son, Absalom, and Solomon was always going to be the one rule. And the short version is David, that doesn't happen. It's like, nope, I don't think so. And Solomon gets anointed king, and Absalom is killed by David's right hand man, and then David mourns, right? And sometimes church transitions feel like that,
That tracks
where
with a
it's
lot
like,
of the ones I've seen. Yeah. That tracks.
I mean, so that's probably fairly close to Mars Hill reenactment. You know what I mean?
Nobody tried to take
Except
over, but yeah.
the kingdom exploded, right? Yeah, no one tried to take over because they would have found themselves in an MMA ring, um, but
That's probably
it's
truer than we'd
it's
like to admit. Yeah.
yeah, um, that guy frustrates me, man. Um, I just saw him on Twitter and he said something good, and I was like, I'm not even gonna like that though, because I don't know. I just don't want to. I don't want to be that guy. Anyway, I so like my own transition into this role followed a really rough thing that happened with in a similar. So there was a pastor that we had that he was a good dude, you know, and did the job well. He cared for people and um preach the word and the things that you want, right? I mean, the bullet points you want, and yet there was some control issues, for lack of a better way to put it, um, to the point that there's really a misunderstanding of his role among the other elders, and so there was like this is me up here, this is you under me, so at the end of the day I'm the boss, which is not the case. It's not the case biblically either. That's not how it works. um so anyway, that turned into kind of a mess, um because there was that it really isn't a whole lot different than what I was explaining earlier. There was that person who um, had so much ownership of this ministry that they weren't willing to give to work with others, and so that didn't end well, right? It felt a little bit more like David and Absalom. um, and but then the guy who he was on staff at the time, he was a pastor of discipleship. um he he was he kind of filled the role for a time of lead. He was like, don't change my title, don't any of that stuff, right? Like but
I'm
I mean
just
it.
helping. Chill out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. um But, short version is he took me under his wing, and I was always going to end up doing this somewhere, somehow, or whatever. It was a calling, and so um he took me under his wing and began to intentionally give away his power, if you will, his authority, responsibilities, those kinds of things. And so to the point that when the most obvious public pastoral thing is preaching, so I began to preach once a month regularly. Then I preached twice a month regularly. And then we got to a point where I was preaching on like any major holiday or those kinds of things. When it came to developing those things, I uh, began to have more interaction with what are we preaching? Um, what does that look like? How is that going to play itself out? And then just other things, like someone passed away, and he took me with him to go visit family and just hang out, develop things, and that there was a lot of that, just osmosis kind of stuff, but like intentional osmosis. I didn't have to seek him, find him, and then follow him around like a puppy. It was all intentional, and that the um I when by the time I was getting ready to actually be voted on and assume this role that I'm in now, um I was preaching all but once a month, and he would preach once a month, and I was doing a lot of the, like, I was leading. I was a worship leader here before that, so I was kind of transitioning that as well onto the shoulders of others. um so there was a lot of real intentionality on his part, and like to this day I don't know how much of it was planned and how much of it he just is like that, so he was living it out. It was probably a lot more of the latter, frankly, um, but it really, I think, showed me what I need to do, which is the whole point of this
Yeah.
conversation that we're having. And so now, now he was at a point of kind of retirement. Like he wanted his mother is still alive. She's like in her mid to upper 90s, I think, or something at this point. Um, but he wanted to get back closer to his mom. That he has a son who is mentally slow, and so he lived in a specific place to help with that, and he needed to get closer to that. So there was some legitimate, like, I need to retire and move on from here. So it wasn't like, let's form a search committee and let's look all over the nation and hope that the interview is the actual guy you're getting. And it wasn't any of that. It was, okay, well, here's a guy who's going through training anyway, who's going to be doing this anyway, who the congregation knows anyway. And he poured into me, and here I am. And so now I'm not ready to retire, and I hope that they're not ready for me to retire quite yet. But we have two guys in seminary training right now who fill the pulpit at times. I never at this point have to go um, um, like anywhere else to get, like, if I'm going to be gone, there's no like reaching out to somebody to see if they can preach. I just harness Tanner or Marshall. And the past, when my mother-in-law was passing away and all that was going on, I had to miss a couple of Sundays, and all I did was text a group, both of them at the same time, and it was like they arm wrestled for it. Like they're eager, they want the opportunities to grow. And so um and some of that included sermon development. Like, they've been in my office, and on the whiteboard I'm showing them what I do, um and I'm their official mentor person for seminary. So there's some stuff that we do there regularly. They share the Sunday school teaching load with me, which means that they're breaking down not only whatever we're doing in Sunday school, but what do we want to do in Sunday school. And they're in those discussions. They're in discussions with me when I have worship leader meetings and things like that. So it what Jeff did for me really played out in me wanting to do the same thing for other men, um, and in training them up. And so, um, yeah, that it was really good, really helpful.
Yeah.
I can't think of like a better,
Well, and I
example
think
that I could have had than
what you're
that.
describing there, two things I want to say about that. One, there's probably somebody listening going, man, I wish I had that. Like, I can't find one person. Like, I can't find one person to
Yeah.
even want to do anything, let alone somebody that I can get up coming underneath me. But secondly, the thought that comes is that, one, and we obviously don't have time to get into this. It could be a whole nother podcast, probably. But the fact that the reason that you're able to do that is because of, and I'm sort of speaking, I'm bringing other experiences in here to make an assumption, probably, but that you have a fairly healthy church. And because you have a fairly
Mhm.
healthy church, you're able to utilize, like, that's a whole nother step, right? If somebody doesn't have that sort of thing in their church, there's some development to be done on the back end before you can't just jump in the deep end of the pool right here and be like, well, I'm going to grab somebody and do this. Like, there's a lot of things that come before this. But the reality is, this is, I would argue, this is the healthiest way to do it, in regards to finding a guy that, or if you're just talking about just different ministries in the church in general, finding somebody that you can go, hey, that person has the gifting and the ability to do this, and I'm going to, again, not be like, hey, it's yours now, but bring them under my wing and have that. What I love what you said about Jeff there, that intentional process of saying, hey, come along. Like, I don't want you to do anything. I just want you to watch. Just come along and hang out and see how this works. And so that, again, that learning through osmosis is so important, that it's not, none of the stress is on your shoulders, none of the, like, nothing. You're just watching it and seeing how this process works out, and all you're doing is learning. Like, there's no hands-on for you. You just need to stay and just look and watch and observe. And then the idea is that eventually over time, you start to do little pieces of it. And then again, it's just this real slow process of transfer that happens over time. And I think that's something we've lost just in general, not just the church, but just, I mean, you train somebody at work, it's like, boom, 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 here's the books, here's the thing, go do it. And that's just not how people learn, really, not well, at least. And so what you just like kind of laid out is just this beautiful picture of saying, like, why would I need to look outside of my church to find somebody to preach? I have guys that can do that. Why would I need to look, do this whole huge search committee when we have a system developed to bring up somebody within the church? And I think there's so many good things about that. And you named one of them. Like, people already know you. They already know your personality. They already know how you do things. They're already familiar with you. Like, there's not this shock of, like you said, I hope the guy we interviewed is the guy we get. Because I've seen that process before happen, where the guy you interview isn't the guy you get. And it wrecks everything. Literally wrecks when I say wrecks everything, I mean literally destroys the church. And so, and I'm just saying, like, some people leave. I mean, the church doesn't exist anymore. And so it's one of those things where the intentionality that Jeff had, like what you said, that came out of probably some legitimate, I don't want to see this thing that happened before me happen again. That birthed this process and this intentionality of leadership to say, all right, what do we need to do to put in place to make this happen well? And I think far too often the churches operate like a business, where we're like, well, who's the best? Let's do all these candidates and we'll figure out who's the best person to do this.
Yeah.
And the reality is what you described, I think, is a very biblical method here. I mean, you're looking at Titus and Timothy and even the leader of Ephesians, which we won't get there. But if somebody wants to go read Acts chapter 20, starting at verse 17, I mean, Paul speaks to the Ephesian leaders and says, hey guys, here's the deal. There's a bunch of you, there's going to be some problems that come along. You need to look for it. But what is he doing there? All he's doing is saying, like, he's giving some great advice on saying, like, I've seen this, you're going to see this, this is how you should deal with it. And there's a lot of tears involved because he loves them. And again, there's this intentionality, there's this relationship involved there, not just this business of do it well and do it right. It's this relational situation they've built. And I think when we're talking about especially leaders in the church and that transition, like, I don't have a whole lot to add to what you said, because it is this, it's this, I think it's the right process. And the sad thing, unfortunately, is that a lot of churches don't have that for either one, because they have a business mentality that we need to hire the next manager, or two, they're not healthy enough to have that process in place, probably because the person that was leading wasn't healthy to set that up. And so now they've set the church up for failure because they were, again, like you talked, just this power control, like, it's all my ministry. Well, what happens when you're gone? Like, what happens when you're gone? Like, great for you that you have all the power, but what does that mean later for everybody else? And so, I just think that I've seen it go terribly, absolutely terribly during transitions. And what you're describing to me and what I see in other leaders that I know is the exact same thing you're talking about. Slowly transitioning people in is absolutely the healthiest way to do it. I mean, there's no, I don't think it's hands above every other way you do it.
I mean, there are a lot of churches, to be fair, there are a lot of churches who aren't, like you were kind of alluding to, that aren't in the spot that we were in, that, maybe it's small enough that you just legitimately, like, you have a hard enough time finding qualified men to be elders, let alone,
and there's a lot of churches in
staff.
that position.
Yes. Yeah. And so I like first just recognizing that, like, this isn't, if you're not doing this, then, like, by any stretch of the imagination, because not everyone has the opportunity to is blessed in the same way. However, I want to also add that, like, there's even a, before we started recording this, I brought up just super briefly the two names Moses and Joshua in this kind of example of leadership transfer. And you see, in that instance, you see the most glaringly obvious example in all of the scriptures is Jesus and his disciples, as they're walking with him and eating with him and all the things, um, and yet there's something that needs to be said in the midst of that, even like even in my situation, excuse me, that I wouldn't have changed, period. um Even in a situation where everything seems to be lined up, and the human interaction, the human role in it is being done biblically and correctly. There is always, so in Joshua chapter 3, um, verse 7, it says, then Yahweh said to Joshua, this day I will begin to magnify you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I've been with Moses, I will be with you. So regardless of how well Moses did, regardless of how eager and humble Joshua was under Moses, it was actually God at the end of the day who worked it out so that Joshua would be successful in what God called Joshua to do there. And that's something that I think is not just really important, but like a must. Like, we must understand that no matter and I think that this helps in a couple of different ways. No matter the um the situation of a church, if you're not where we were, um and to be fair, this church wasn't there for like 50 years of its
Yeah,
existence.
that's a great
um
time. Yeah, it takes time, like
yeah.
time, like real time. Yeah,
Yeah, and so, if you're not right now where we were then, and you just don't have the same luxuries or blessings from God. um, God is still pretty big, okay, and like, all of this can still work out, and maybe you hear this and just understand, like, it begins with you. It begins by you being convicted that you need to do two things. One, invest in those who are younger than you, maybe just younger than you in the faith, or younger than you physically, so that you may have been through more things than them, and you can speak into those things lovingly and humbly. Um, uh, and then on the other end of that, the second thing that you need to do is ensure that you're intentionally looking upward, to, like, seek out other people who are older and wiser than you, and latch on. Like, this is one instance when being a leech is not a bad thing. Okay, so um, I would just suggest both of those things, and then on the other end of that, let's say that you are in a position, kind of like I was blessed to be in. Um, this One of the struggles that will find you is that you'll look back on that human interaction, the human part of all of that, and wonder sometimes, depending on what's going on in your ministry, you'll wonder, man, was God in this at all? Because right now, this sucks. Like, right now, I don't feel qualified to do this. I don't feel able to do this. There's no way I can pull this off. Jeff was wrong. You know what I mean? Like, that
yeah,
there are
yeah,
legitimate
yeah. Just
times where
self
that's
doubt.
going to
Yeah,
come up, and you have to understand, like, this Joshua 3:7 thing, that, look, at the end of the day, however that vote went, it wasn't because chiefly of what Jeff did, or of what I did, or of anything I wrote, or any of that. At the end of the day, it was because God wanted that to happen, and so it happened. And so you're exactly where he has put you. And you need to be okay with that. Buckle your pants and keep going, you know? And, so there, there's so much, I think, of this that, um, is that like, you don't have, Jesus take the wheel is kind of a fun little thing that we like to think, but you need to drive. Okay. Like, you gotta put your hands on the steering wheel and go and do the thing biblically. Meaning, if it's your family, pour into your family, lead your family, do the right thing. If you're a wife and you have a husband that's lazy, that doesn't even want to come to church half the time, and you're the spiritual leader, pressure him. This is my permission for you to nag your husband, right? I mean, in the most loving way you can possibly do it, but pressure him, because that's what he's supposed to do. And um so if you have this is you put your hands on the steering wheel and drive, because the reality is not that Jesus needs to take the wheel, but that he has the road conditions under control, that he's controlling the weather like he did in the gospels, that he's aware of your tire situation, or like he's got it all anyway. So um that doesn't mean that you get to just hands off the situation. We need to act, and it begins with whoever's convicted by this in the first place.
I think that is a really that speaks to all aspects. So whether you have a church like where you were talking about as far as your example, or a church that you're like, I am literally the only person that seems to care. Like regardless of where you're at on that spectrum, what you just said I think is really important. Okay, fine. So do your thing then, like do what you're supposed to do. And I think
Yeah.
that can, again, I think what you mentioned there was so important, because there's going to be times of like, we're like, wow, it's all working great, everything's clicking, this is exactly what I'm supposed to do. And then there's other times where more often than not, where you're just like, this is dumb, like I don't think it's working. It doesn't seem to. So when you just to go back to the family worship part, you're like, the kids aren't attentive. Or when you're in the Titus 2 mentality, you're
Yeah.
like, no, nobody seems to be taking any advice. Or when you're in the church leadership position and you're just like, I can't even find one dude that's qualified to be an elder. And it's very easy to let those instances very much not only beat you up, but allow you to beat yourself up and be like, well, it's just not worth it then. And I think what you just said there was incredibly helpful. Okay, fine. But it's not like you're ever going to have the pristine conditions. God's still in control regardless, and he's still working in it. So do what you need to do and be faithful in it. And sometimes what that really looks like, just for real, I've talked to a lot of youth leaders that will look up to like these big youth ministries that have these enormous impacts, and they'll be like, I got 4 kids. Do well with the 4 kids you have then. Like I can tell you all this ministry stuff that like we did and how the youth group grew and da 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 da. Who cares? If you have 4 kids, be faithful to those 4 kids. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. And if it grows, it
Hmm.
grows, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But the point is, you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do and do it well. And so same thing with like, if you can't find one person to be an elder, well, just preach about eldership, live faithfully, and trust that God's going to take care of it. And it's not everything. Like I think sometimes, especially when we talk about this, like in our heads and in other people's heads, there's this idea that, well, you do this and then like a huge great explosion will happen and this thing will just work. And it's like, maybe that's not it. Maybe you're just supposed to be faithful with, in this youth group example, 4 kids forever. And that's what you're supposed to do. And that doesn't feel like a win for some people. But the reality is, you don't know what those 4 kids are going to do. I mean, Charles Spurgeon was, he got a chance because he just showed up at a church one time. I mean, and who knew that that's what was going to happen, right? He showed up at a church. The pastor wasn't there. Some layman preached. And through that layman, which nobody would have assumed anything was going to happen from, Charles Spurgeon hears the gospel. And so and then you have this whole and that guy probably didn't know till years later that sermon that he barely put together even did anything, but it did. And so you don't know what small part of an impact that you have in this picture, but the point is that regardless of it at home or at church or in a pastoral ministry, you be faithful and just let that be okay.
Hmm.
Be okay with that. So
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a temptation. I know, I bring up, that, uh, that bit about God being the one that, like, that's where you have to rest, that he's the one that has you where you are. Um, because there's a temptation that we all like. There I'm aware that there will be a temptation. Anyone who hears this, who is part of a church that's smaller and going through difficult time or whatever, who hears this and is jealous or envious a little bit of the situation that I've been describing. um and it's important that they know that, like, no matter the pretty situation, there's ugly. Like, there is difficulty. There are times when I go, man, this is, like, I'm an idiot, this is not going well, and I think it's funny you bring up Charles Spurgeon. Charles Spurgeon was, by today's standards, he probably would have been diagnosed as bipolar.
Oh yeah,
Like, he
yeah,
was so depressed, like so depressed, and at times, like, for no apparent reason. And at times the prince of preachers couldn't fill his own pulpit and preach. Um, and so, as glamorous as that looks, and like all of the wow that comes with Charles Spurgeon, he was just a dude. He was just another guy who God gifted, for sure. And uh, he just he put his hands on the steering wheel. That's all. That's really all it was. God gave him gifts, and he just woke up in the morning and did what he was supposed to do for the day. And that's really, bottom line. We live in a culture that lives almost exclusively vicariously through other people, watching them on YouTube or TikTok or whatever. um and like, stop. So, ministry wise, right? Like, when we talk about family, leading families, and ministry, transferring ministry, or moving in ministry, or growing in leadership, or growing in discipleship, all of these things, right? um when we think about those things, stop watching people bike race on YouTube and buy a bike, right? Like,
yeah,
that's the I mean, if I could say one thing, I think that would be it, because it starts with just doing it.
yeah. And don't expect to be as good as them right away, or maybe ever.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe I don't
do
I
it
don't
because
have
you want to,
I'm not
because you know you
I'm
should.
not
Yeah,
under any illusions that someday people are gonna be reading my sermons like they do Spurgeon, right? Like, I yeah, no, I don't think so. And that's okay. Like,
I'd actually
um,
prefer them not. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, they're probably gonna find some stupid things that I said, um, but I think it is important to do it. To just, like, maybe that's the only goal right now. Maybe that's where you're at. That, like, the
yep,
goal just has to be, you know what? I'm just gonna do devotions with my family. It's gonna be ugly. I mean, and if you're just starting to do it, it will be ugly. And I promise, it's not gonna be like, a sitcom where the kids are sitting in the corner with their own Bibles open going, "But Father, what about this word?" Like, that's not how it works.
I was doing my own search in Greek and I found out that this word. Yeah, that's not happening.
Yeah, no, I like the success sometimes is just that you did it without punching something, you know? Like, honestly,
I
it
didn't
really
yell
is.
today. It was a win.
It's it's just as much about the faithfulness and just doing it as it is about the content. Um, and like,
I love that.
we talked about.
I win without punching something. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about um learning by osmosis earlier in the discussion, and so even that you're doing family worship is you teaching them the importance of family worship, the importance of God, the priority of Christianity in their life, the priority of living out who God has made them. So regardless of any of the content, or any of the theology, or any of the scriptures that you're utilizing, or any of that stuff, you're teaching them priorities, and you're training them up in the way they should go. And so, I mean, it starts there.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think that rounds out the conversation really well. So this idea is that obviously you're going to, in some form or fashion, be passing or should be passing on the faith. So whether that be you have a family and you have kids, there's obviously ways, I mean, that you described to do that. Obviously, that book, you can go back that Rob mentioned and check that out if you're interested. And then if you don't have kids, Titus 2 doesn't really leave you off the hook. It very much says, hey, you're still supposed to be passing this down. You're still supposed to be giving some sort of experience here to younger believers along the way somehow. And then even in a whole different sort of vein of that, like there are ways to bring up leaders within the church, whether that be in whatever ministry that looks like. There are ways to do that in a way that's going to give somebody whiplash and just like, here it all is, or in a way that's like very well done, and you just sort of pass it on along the way through example, answering questions and being there and all of that. And so regardless of what that looks like as a believer, there's a clear sort of imperative. You're supposed to pass something on. So it's really a matter of like, what is that in my life? What does that look like? How do I do that well? And how am I, and I think this is the biggest point that we spend a lot of time on, but I think it's important. How do I do that faithfully, even when it doesn't feel like anything's happening? And then just doing that and being faithful in it. And I know in those moments, I'll end with this, and then I'll let you sort of whatever last words you have to say. But I'll end with this. I think there's some times where you don't feel like anything's happening, and you maybe will never know the impact you have. If you're lucky, maybe you'll hear about it later. And there's been a few instances, and when I say few, I mean less than a handful of kids that were in youth ministry. In my youth ministry, that I thought weren't listening at all. I would have put money down that they weren't paying attention. And so it was a matter of that intentionality of every week coming in and just telling them, hey, be quiet, we're looking at this. They couldn't tell you a single lesson I talked about, but they do remember the intentionality and the faithfulness that every Wednesday night we were here, we did that. And in some of their lives, I'll just be honest, some of their lives, that was simply me pushing a seed into the ground that somebody else got to do something with. I didn't get to do some great watering, and I didn't maybe get to see this, the plant coming out of the ground. It was just me pushing the seed down into the soil, being like, just stay there, and hearing about it later. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, just be faithful in whatever area you're in, and maybe you'll get lucky enough to see the plant. And if you're not, trust that God is good and He's going to do something with it. So,
Revelation chapter 7. Verses 9 and 10. It says this: after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And they cry out with a loud voice, saying, salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. That crowd happens because of what we're talking about. That crowd happens because from generation to generation to generation, be it families or in the church setting or in church leadership settings or whatever, people continue to pass the gospel of Jesus Christ on, and faithfully they do this. And that's, so we know that it does happen, that it will happen. And so the most important thing is to just put your hands on the wheel. Doesn't matter the kind of car it is, or the condition of the car at the moment, or even where the map is telling you to go right at the moment. It just matters that you're doing it. Pick up the Bible and train people. Pick up the Bible and be trained. And this is the end. This is what we all look forward to. And that crowd happens because people are doing it, are passing him along to the next generation.
Awesome. Well, guys, if you found this helpful, make sure you leave a like. If you disagree with us, which there's no way possible you can, but if you do, leave a comment in the comment section. If you found this
And leave a like.
Yeah, and leave a like too,
Yeah.
please.
If you don't like this, give us a thumbs up.
Yes, that
I
will
don't
really show us. If you hate this so bad that you leave a thumbs up, I don't know what I'll do. Don't do that, please. We'll talk to you next time. See ya. Bye.